That's very much through magazines. Yeah. So I kind of was writing a lot when I was at university. I didn't do anything to do with like writing or the humanities or literature or publishing or anything. I studied zoology, so sort of animal biology, animal sciences, which I loved and is still like a massive part of my life and a lot of my research focus now, weirdly, that sort of loops all the way back to that. So I was doing that, and then but it was very much like a kind of very formal life sciences program. You were being trained to essentially what prepare for a career producing research. And that was fun, but I realized that that was not quite where my interest lay. I had like a grant to go and conduct a research project in Finland, looking at heart evolution, and it was like great, but I spent the whole time very confused, like as well, like what I was doing, and the fact that all the work and the time I was doing was essentially being boiled down into a peer-reviewed paper and data sets, and I just realized like there was so much going on that was being lost in this process that I was kind of more obsessed with, and I think that kind of made me realize that I wasn't really going to go super far as a research scientist. I was sort of good at what I did, but you have to be really obsessed. You have to kind of like live and breathe this stuff, and I just didn't. I was always getting distracted. So I graduated, finished, left like the world of being a scientist, and then just kind of was trying to think about what I'd be interested in doing, and I had no idea. And I knew I liked writing. I was writing a lot in my spare time. I did all the kind of classic, like, student publication stuff, made my own magazine, that kind of like very naive things. And then, yeah, I don't know. I just was like working in London, just like jobs. And
Yes.
I gave myself a year to find some foot in the door in the world of, I just wanted to know what like editing was and what publishing was and how you made magazines and how that worked. It wasn't even necessarily linked to fashion. Um, and yeah, I just sort of got an internship and really liked it and found that I was quite good as an editor.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting is they said like, "Oh, I was so confused." I really like that as a kind of observation because it's like you were confused, you were looking at this work, and you were thinking, "Well, this is not going to end up anywhere." So maybe there was like an awareness, or there is an awareness of the maybe importance of dissemination or importance of
Yeah.
communicating across.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very aware of it and interested in it even when I was quite young and still studying and doing my undergrad. That feeling of um feeling like there's so much there, so much experience and so much that's going on and so much that's of interest, and then feeling quite um a bit like sad almost about the lot like amount of stuff that gets lost and not knowing and not feeling like I had the right way of engaging with it myself. That's something that much later there's a term that is in, I think it's one of Robert McFarlane's books. He's a nature writer, but there's one of his books which is kind of about underground worlds, opens with him meeting up with the mycologist Merlin Sheldrake, who wrote the book. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like it's done incredibly well about mushrooms, basically.
Oh
Uh,
yes.
and it opens with them in I think in the Forest of Dean, and Merlin. He's a research scientist. He has like a research position, but he was describing this idea of what he calls like the dark twin of scientific research. And for every paper that gets written, there's this thing that he calls the dark twin of all the conversations, the strange habits, the sort of like other world, subterranean world that produces that research. And he also had this feeling of like it's so insane that all this stuff gets lost and like disappears essentially in the in the process of conforming to the necessities of the medium of the scientific paper and peer review. And that led to him to kind of writing books. But it was interesting when I read that, it really echoed something that I'd felt myself, coming from a similar sort of academic background.
Some things need to be lost as well, in a way.
Well, that's part of the editing process, and that's just part of the necessity of like accepting the medium within which you're working. So it's not like it was a problem. It wasn't like a problem. It was just knowing that if I continue being a scientist and producing scientific research, I accept that the primary medium within which I'm producing my work will be the peer review paper. And that was not a way in which I didn't really like that. And I didn't like the idea of that being my primary medium of, I guess, like translating my work and the time I was spending. And then if you progress far enough and you're good enough at what you do, a lot of people like Merlin, like Sheldrake, I guess, you're able to expand that into, other forms of writing. But I think that's quite hard to do. So yeah, things need to be lost. You can't have everything, but maybe my gut feeling was I was just more interested in the other stuff than I was in the data, I suppose.
But as an editor
Mm.
yourself, is that part, presumably that's part of the job, but that's part of the, that's a consideration. It's like what is included and what isn't included.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what's interesting is duality, because on one hand, as an editor, you're preserving, you're documenting something, but then on the
Mhm.
other hand, removing as well. So
Yeah, I definitely see it more as the kind of like removing or refinement, or but maybe that's too simplistic in that it implies that you're always kind of like, shining and making this thing, more perfect than it was before, which isn't always the case. And part of it is just like a decision-making process of what you leave in and out based on the thing that you're trying to say. And maybe part of it is preserving, like what narrative are you shaping? Who are you trying to reach? What's the context within which you're publishing this stuff? So there's not like a clear process that is applicable to everything. It really depends on the context of the thing you're making. Whether that's a magazine, and then what is that magazine, or are you making a book, or are you doing an exhibition, or is it a piece of sound, or are you just sitting down for an interview with somebody? Yeah, but that editing thing is a really fundamental way of thinking that I think spreads beyond any specific discipline. Like when I say I'm an editor, like I say that also with a massive awareness that it doesn't it means kind of everything and nothing, sort of. It implies to me more of a thought process than a particular job with a particular set of roles. Because I work with graphic designers who are editors. Their way of thinking about design is very much through editorial design. It's like I work with words, they work with image, but we're both editors in a way. I think a very formative thing for me in thinking about what editing is beyond like the world of making a magazine, I think was making an issue of a magazine that I've worked for a long time called Fantastic Man. Making an issue of Rem Koolhaas was really important and opened up a lot for me because he is fundamentally an architect who works as an editor, and his background and training was as a journalist. And I don't think that that's a kind of story that is just told to kind of create an image. I think it's very true, like the idea of editing as a process that could be applied from making magazines or being a writer or a journalist or working in documentary films or whatever he was doing before that, and then that kind of shifting over into the world of architecture and designing something. So that was quite eye-opening just to see how many parallels there were between, like, not to make it sound super naive, but just between like sitting down and making a magazine and then deciding how you're going to sort of design and bring about a project, and and conceive of it and think of it. There are like so many differences, but also a lot of overlaps that I think are contained within this like fuzzy thing of I guess like editorial thought and decision making.
So I think that's interesting that you mentioned that issue, and I wonder. Um, so it looks like I guess, as an either editor or an interviewer, or you're able to access that world. You're able to access that world of thinking, of thought, that is, let's say, in this case, the world of maybe architectural thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point does that become apparent to you? Like, why is that issue more impactful on you as a kind of person developing than another issue?
I think that specific issue of the magazine, that was because that was at a time where the magazine had shifted from what it had been for a long time, which is essentially like for anyone that's not familiar with it, it's like a biannual fashion magazine. Ostensibly, it's around men's fashion and style and culture. It comes out twice a year. It's primarily built around a series of like long form profile interviews with interesting people, and then image series, typically around fashion and style, and then a whole other load of, assorted things. I really love making it because it's a very particular thing to make. It's quite unusual. Sometimes I step back and I'm just like, wow, it's so fun that this is my job. And it's like a thing that I get paid to do. It's quite cool. Um, but usually that would be a lot of what was made and how it operated was there's kind of it was just each issue that would just be like picking like 6 or 7 or 8 people and building a magazine around that, and there wasn't a kind of particular, it was just sort of responding vaguely to your own set of interests. Then there was a period of time where it switched to this very awkward square shape and became very thematic, and each issue had a particular theme. It was more like a research project. That again is a whole thing that was born about through the two founders, essentially just like, I think, in a way that I have like massive admiration for. They're very good at just deciding when they're bored and deciding when they think they need to change things for themselves, even though a lot of people maybe would say the opposite and say you found a very good formula for a thing, you should keep it consistent. It's a kind of winning thing. They're really not afraid to just sort of say, yeah, like, I'm getting a bit tired of this, let's completely change everything and kind of boof. So we had this sort of square research project thing, and it meant that we could go very in depth on a particular idea for like one issue, but not in a mega academic way. It was always done in this kind of world where it's taking the act of making a magazine very seriously, but then not being too serious. And it's kind of serious unseriousness was a sort of like driving principle. They're Dutch. They know Rem very well. He's been in the magazine before. It was in the build up to this countryside show at the Guggenheim, which kind of eventually became like a lost show because of COVID. But it was in
Yeah.
the build up to that. And we just sent him and his team a message like a year in advance, just saying, would you want to make this issue of the magazine with us, where we kind of make it with you, but you're not a guest editor, so it's kind of with you, but about you at the same time. And you're doing this weird balance where you're projecting someone's kind of image of themselves while also documenting them externally. Conceptually, like without overthinking it, it was doing a lot of weird things all at the same time. So it was a moment that was very different from how I'd made things in the past, magazine-wise. It meant I just spent a lot of time with him or different members of his team, looking at how they research, looking at how they think about what
But
they, yeah.
so it didn't necessarily come from like Ram as a kind of a thinker that thinks completely differently to anyone else you've ever met, but it's many things. It's the magazine shifting, it's Ram shifting. It's like,
Yeah, it was more just because it was a really interesting project to work on. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily being exposed to some kind of like never before seen brilliance that kind of fundamentally changed me. It was like he's really great and really like fun to spend time with, but I'm not a fan of that kind of like transformative, life-changing process narrative and the kind of idea of propagating someone's genius. It wasn't that. It was more seeing like how someone had set up a space for themselves and other people around them to work in a particular way, to work on a particular kind of project, to be able to say like, right, we're gonna like do this thing with a fashion magazine very in depth, but we're also working on a show at the Guggenheim, or we're gonna do to be honest, I was like not even that interested in any of the architectural things they were doing. It was more about how he'd managed to, alongside other people, to make a space for just like ideas and thinking about stuff and doing a whole load of different things. That was very inspiring. It's like, wow, like so cool to have access or to be able to sort of be able to move in so many different directions and do so many different things. I think that's kind of resonated with me as someone who going back to all this stuff I was saying about what I studied and how I was thinking about it, and kind of that feeling of like getting a bit distracted, but being very focused and interested in things, but always like wanting to know how else you can look at a thing or how you can follow an idea in many different ways or through different mediums. So that's what got kind of that's what got under my skin, basically.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, and I think it was just before COVID, I had a strong sense. Actually, it was during COVID that I started this project. And
Mm.
when I started the project, I had this kind of I have theorized to myself this idea of like a magazine person, which is
Hmm.
basically a person that I guess holds a set of ideas in terms of practice or different forms of practicing, as well as different references, and is kind of able and free to constantly like abandon them and kind of find new ones. Uh, and I just always like I think the first people that I was talking to, and I think now I'm kind of coming back to it in an interesting way, are people that I have always felt that they have that sensibility. Do you ever think of like a person as a magazine or
Like an individual.
yeah,
Um,
or like what would be a psychology of a
of like a magazine as a like
person as a magazine as a person? I don't know.
ah yeah. Mm, I don't know. In a way, like I am probably by definition like a magazine person. Like I have been trained like a magazine has essentially been my like for a long time it's essentially my like postgraduate study. Like and because the internship I got was with Fantastic Man. I only wanted to go and work there. I didn't want to, if that didn't work, I wouldn't have then gone and applied for an internship at Vogue or GQ, or I had no interest in those magazines. I never read them, I didn't buy them. It was a very particular thing that I identified and was interested in about that magazine specifically that was to do with the form of like editorial process and thought and way of constructing this thing that was a fashion magazine, but very clearly was also just like a process that reflected on making a magazine itself. And it was developing a kind of way of thinking. So if that hadn't worked out, I don't know what I would be doing now. Maybe I'd be working doing like documentary films. I have no idea. Like, who knows? But I ended up doing that thing, and so magazines became this like training thing for me about how to think about yeah ideas and editing and writing, but just how you like gather lots of things together and then put them in a certain sequence and order and rhythm, and that's your project and that's your thing. So. I'm a bit of a magazine person, I suppose, because I've literally been trained in that world. I don't know if there's like a magazine person or how you would sum it up. I think it's more that like everyone is a magazine, in that everyone has a specific set of varied interests, and you could, in theory, every single individual on the planet could make a magazine based around that set of interests. It would maybe be very, it might be terrible, but it's like I believe that sort of specific worldview um, is inherent in everybody, and that's what kind of makes good magazines good. It's just that I guess those people who make magazines have gotten good or have the ability, or it's just part of their job to somehow translate that internal set of interests into something external that other people might want to pick up as well.
But I guess magazine implies a certain flow, and I think those two things are maybe something that define a magazine person in comparison to like a person that's more set. And
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe there's like it's to do with yeah, I don't know. It's like there's a flow, there's a balance, there's like whatever agenda it is that you're working with. Maybe there is a nimbleness. I don't know though. A lot of magazines are very also have a specific remit, you know, and they are quite set in their ways. They're not it's not complete like freedom to tear it up every single time you start. Even the fact that they're working ostensibly within a defined medium of the magazine is in a way like a bit set. You know, that's why I eventually had to stop doing it and start doing other things for a while because I couldn't just continue just making magazines. It was a bit limiting. But yeah, when I say like I'm a magazine person and I've been trained in it, and then you say, is there something to do with like flow or assembly of information? I think that's 100% one of the things that I've been taught to do or it's been developed or why I was drawn to it in the first place. That kind of you have a space, you have a defined thing, your vessel, and that's the
Mm.
magazine. It could be an exhibition, it could be a book, could be whatever. Talking to designers has been very helpful for this because they have a lot more fluidity in how they think about how ideas can live in different spaces and mediums. But you have that thing, maybe there's a specific agenda involved, and then you just like go and you find like these are the things I'm going to put together. And then you put them together and you see how it works, and you're like, these two still work, these three need to go, we need to find this one, that thing's not available. And you're just constantly like responding in real time to how the things are landing in front of you. And yeah, it's nice. It's just like it's very like molding something. At least like in the magazines that I've been trained to make, it's very like hands-on, it's very physical, it's very responsive. We come together for like a month to make this thing, and it's a lot of moving things around on walls. I would love to do, I'm slowly like getting to do this more often, but I would love to do like a seminar or a unit on what I would call magazine writing, which is not how to write a magazine profile. It's about how writing works within all the other structures of a magazine. So like headlines, intros, captions, title text, what sits above the barcode, all this like stuff that we call informally like furniture. Um, this is like such a fun and weird thing to get to do. And because it particularly responds in a very dynamic way to like paper stock, type size, typeface, how it sits on the page, whether it's here or here, where is the image in conjunction to that? And you'll continually have to rework how that form of writing works all the time. So I really love that's one of the things that's like kept me hooked for such a long time is that part of it. Yeah.
That's like almost an architect speaking,
Yeah, maybe.
because there is like I think it's a spatial consideration. What you're talking about is really like a spatial consideration. So in some ways, I guess magazine is also a space. I mean, it is a space.
Yeah, they are. Yep. They're a space. They're a funny space that you can like walk into from any particular point. And that can also influence how you think about that space. It's like, yeah, it's like some people get really annoyed if you flip a magazine back to front or a book because they're like, hey, I like designed it with the sequence and you're meant to move through it. But I always think of it more, you have to have a sort of like sequence, I guess, from a start to finish, but you should also feel like you can jump into it at any point and know what's going on. But yeah, the spatial considerations of how this stuff lives and works and completely changes context from things that might seem quite small is, you know, like questions of like millimeters. It's again why I'm super lucky that all the way through this, as I was learning to be like an editor, which primarily in magazine world is like a text focused thing. You know, traditionally you're like, you commission the text, you edit the text, you probably, depending where what kind of place you work, you might have some say in like headlines, but often that can come down to like a completely different person. But you're very like you're quite top level and it's text focused, and you put that together and you're doing the big brushstrokes. I do that, but I work with designers who are editorial designers, and we have so many conversations about how these minute details influence the text and vice versa. And it's really a way of thinking about words and language that has been developed way more through talking to designers than it has been from working with like writers. I had to be completely honest. Yeah. Um,
Just,
it's cool. I love it.
and this opens up so many different kind of strands, but maybe let's maybe explore this notion of um, kind of relevance, maybe. So
Hmm.
I feel like magazine is a tool, or writing in media in general. I mean, we could even like kind of move away from a magazine as a fixed kind of medium
Yeah.
in this conversation. But I guess media more broadly is there to both feed off things in the culture that are emerging,
Hmm.
but also perpetuates certain narratives. So
Yeah.
it's both choosing the things that you're platforming, that you're giving space to, and in that way you're presenting them as relevant and things that we should be talking about and seeing and kind of understanding. And at the same time, you're feeding off things that are kind of popping up everywhere around us. So how do you think about that? Do
About
you
relevance. Oh, yeah, I think a really important thing, again, this is really specifically around like magazines or like more broadly media, is probably not thinking too much about relevance if you can help it. Because it's a very slippery slope. And I think a lot of the strength of things that have a very clear voice and are very good and a very kind of that really grab you is that that voice comes from a very internal place. And it's really responding, and it's not an arrogant thing of like my taste is so good that I back it, that it's going to be interesting. It's just more, I think if you're constantly trying to respond to what's external from you and your own set of ideas and opinions or interests, then you're only ever going to be, it's a kind of like fake response to something. It's never genuine, and therefore, and I think that will kind of show eventually. Or it just makes for a sort of weaker project. So there is this like fundamental interiority, I think, of doing something well and having a faith that if you are interested in that thing enough, then other people will come to it and share that. And it might not be everybody, but you will find those people who share that thing for you. Obviously, it's not always completely that black and white. Nothing ever is. And you also have to gauge, you know, there is an audience there. There might be a broader audience for like this topic or person than this thing. Maybe this thing is too niche. It's not for here. So, but again, that's just like gauging what your possible audience or like, why are you making this thing and who is it for? And if the answer is genuinely like just you, then like cool, like go make that thing for yourself. But that's rarely the case. And you'll know that there's a kind of like rough audience or group of people who you might be speaking to or who might be interested in this thing. So making like a fashion magazine, I guess you're really thinking a lot of it is like, who are we interested in? But then also like, yeah, there is a bit of like, would other people be interested in that? Or have we seen that too much? And it's this balancing act about following your gut instinct and then also having a keen sense for what might excite a potential reader. But I think fundamentally you need to be guided by that kind of internal compass rather than completely thinking about what an externalized or kind of theoretical reader might be interested in. Um, yeah. And so in terms of like cultivating relevance, yeah, I don't know, like you can only respond to what's there, who you have to work with. I'm not sure how easy it is now to just like pluck someone from obscurity as like a media outlet, particularly with the rise of like social media. I don't think that that's the role that it plays. It can definitely give someone a particular like read and spin, and depending on what that media outlet is, it will make them perceive them in a particular way. That's very important. But the idea of like generating cultural relevance just sort of, I don't know, like out of context, I don't know how true that is anymore of media.
What would make someone, I guess, what would then make someone relevant again? Or what would make, an artist relevant again? I mean, surely, okay, so sure, Tate is going to choose to do a retrospective, and then suddenly we're going to talk about this artist. But
Yeah. So
do you,
there, there's a whole kind of like little ecosystem of things and sort of decisions that are made. And it's this very vague thing of like I like the like the moment and reading the sort of flow of what's happening culturally, what seems of interest, what things like ebb and flow and they rise. And sometimes it can feel very a bit superficial and a bit cruel or just like the worst side of like working in culture or working in fashion, just deciding like who is of interest, who's relevant enough to feature, can feel very if you remove it from any context, it can feel really like dark and a bit horrible. But there's also just a kind of you're acting as a thing with a fairly broad and popular audience. It's got to project a certain something. And so, yeah, you just respond to like ebbs and flows of what people are up to, how they look, how they project themselves, what they've been working on, how open or not do they seem to press. There's not like a magic formula. You just really look at everything on a case by case basis. Um,
but do you ever feel like you need to resist some narrative? You can actually feel
yeah.
that a narrative has been artificially generated or boosted.
Yeah, always, because the narrative is all usually like artificial. You know,
Yeah.
really, like it usually is, and that's not always a bad thing. It's just that there's like things are just by necessity simplified. You can't have that much. People can't. I don't know. That level of nuance is like very limited, I think, to the private realm of an individual. And if they're public facing, their public facing persona will by necessity have it will be like narrowed down and there'll be particular narratives that come into it, I think. So yeah, you sort of I don't know if you when you say resist of certain narratives, it might mean like
Yeah.
not featuring certain people because they're really huge. Yeah, I guess within the kind of stuff I do, yeah, like I'm not that interested in having someone in just because they're like super, super, super famous. But then it might also be like doing a story on someone and trying to encourage the writer to not just recycle tropes about that individual that we already know and to try and like dig out something that feels like a little bit more of a yeah, and not a different angle for the sake of it, but like not just hammering in like a singular story about that person. Um,
I mean, people are known and then they're not known. I find it so fascinating, like teaching. And, in the context of, let's say, an architecture school, the year when I started teaching, Wolfgang Tillmans was very well known. But now
mm,
I ask my students if they know who he is, and they don't.
yeah, yeah. Which again, I don't know if that is any particular sign of his like waning relevance. I don't think so. I think that's just I don't know what that is. Like I sometimes talk about this and I increasingly like teach now and I really enjoy it. And then other people I talk to who teach, sometimes that question comes up of like, oh yeah, like no one has any idea who this person is anymore. Like there's that thing, and you're like, wow, like I can't believe they don't know. Yeah, Wolfgang Tillmans, like why wouldn't you know that? But I sort of resist. I've never understood the idea that therefore represents a changing set of tastes or interests of a new generation because I didn't know who Wolfgang Tillmans was when I was a student until a certain point. I just like, and I never ever saw myself as a student as like an arbiter of taste and someone who defined what was interesting or not. I was there to like learn, and I very much knew there was so I was so hungry to learn about people who I'd never heard of before. Um, and I think that curiosity is still there. So it doesn't freak me out when I'm like sitting in a room full of people and they don't know someone who they should know about. Um, but I guess like people knowing instinctively who someone are, maybe at the time when you started, maybe that was closer to something that makes people more aware of
Yeah,
someone.
the exhibition at Tate,
Like
or
I say, retrospective, exactly. That kind of thing. So I don't know, maybe students, and when you're young, you just naturally like know
You
the
don't
things
know
that
as
are very
much. Yeah.
big and in front of you, and then over time you'll like seek things out and find that finer information.
Yeah, I guess the question isn't, in a way, I'm not necessarily disappointed that they don't. I guess I'm just intrigued by the way the culture moves around,
Mm.
and this question of what is there in the air. Uh,
Yeah,
and I guess with like we are all aging, like we're all like getting older, and as I guess as you are older, you are seeing these patterns.
yeah, yeah. You learn and see patterns and understand things, and I'm sure in like 10 years' time, I'll look back at myself now and think about how little I knew about anything. Probably because I you know like learning is just a sort of continual thing. Um, yeah, I think yeah, I also like the other thing that I was going to bring up about the like teaching thing is that it also can make people feel very old very quickly, you know, in that they suddenly are confronted with like a generation of people who are often like, you know, like shockingly young. Um, and it makes them reflect a bit on their own interests, what shared relevance do they have between them in terms of how they live and what's important to one another. I'm I don't know. I'm less concerned about it. Like I've never been that concerned about it. That's partly because I think when I was that age, I was also like not that, I wasn't thinking about that either. If someone had come up to me and looked at me as a sort of like case study of what a young person was and how they thought about things, I would have found that very strange. I don't know. I think you can continue to like age and be an aging person and still just be curious about the world. And that will give you some common ground between not just people who are younger than you, but people who are older than you as well. I think when I was young, I was constantly seeking out conversations with people who are in completely different generations to my own as much as I was with my peers. And that's just like around wanting to talk to people and have conversations and be curious about stuff. So like yeah, I don't know. I don't think about it too much. Like I don't care. I don't care about generational like trends and stuff like that.
yeah. But I think presumably that's on a certain level, you are constantly reading, and your interest is evolving, and you're attracted by things that appear in front of you. Um, have you been able to track that evolution? I mean, you of course probably have, but I wonder, where do you find yourself now?
Yeah, of just like my like interests and focuses and what I'm looking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think like with anyone, it's always linked to. I mean, maybe it's not the case, but I think to me, it's always linked to a thread of like learning and inquiry around something. And that could be from, so I could chart that from like, yeah, a lot of my like early stuff would be partly like practical things I was reading from an academic background, but also wanting to really like learn more about literature. So, you know, I just like read tons of novels. And then that shifted a bit to working in magazines, and I would read and surround myself with like printed matter that would help me understand how magazines work and the kind of history of publishing and magazine making. And that's like that's kind of consistent. Maybe like where things are now, I don't know. I guess I read more. I don't know. A lot of stuff is linked to a particular project I'll be working on at any given time. So now I'm, you know, there are like some constants. So like, you know, I'm like constantly reading and looking at books that maybe feed into a prevailing interest I have in the natural world, I guess, and ecology and non-human life. But that's become increasingly at the forefront of certain kind of pieces of research I'm doing or extended writing pieces I'm doing. So that's like in like the piles of books that I have around me on my desk, like that's very much there. Um, yeah, I think my like my habits of what I surround myself with are maybe linked to like a consistency in just like it's very broad, like it's always very broad intentionally. So I'll buy like I also just buy a lot of books that are so upstairs from here I have a room just full of books that are anything from books on artists I might be interested in or designers, but also like I will buy like a whole back catalogue of like the annual I have like a whole collection of annual reports from an archaeological society in Canterbury that I found and they're
Oh,
like
this is
and they're
great.
very but they're very beautiful as objects and I saw them as like I need to have these as a thing because it's going to be important to me at some point. I can feel it that it's kind of feeding it's sort of like feeding myself with information and cues that I might not think about this or find a need for it for like 10 years, but I know somehow that I need it there. And I need to, and it's like collecting this stuff to have it as it's like just like food and material. And I don't know what I'll do with it. It might be like the way they're constructed as objects. It might be the particular typeface they use. It might be the language. It might just be the idea of like looking at how they produce their annual expenses reports. They have an amazing like staple binding that really drew me to them. There's like a kind of very rough, they're usually from like the late 80s, early 90s. There's a particular kind of like quite rough, sim formal,
Yeah,
quite
utilitarian. They're utilitarian.
yeah, which I love. So I have a lot of like I collect and gather a lot of stuff like that. Which is maybe weird because if I was like a designer or graphic designer, perhaps it would make sense and I'd have all these like visual references, but I collect a lot of visual references. They're very important to me, and I think that they do feed into how I write and edit things because like I'm lucky enough that a lot of the work I do is sort of visual. Like I know enough about my work that I know enough to know my limits and I know that I need to work with good designers, but I also know enough about what I do to be able to contribute meaningfully from I guess like across the spectrum of what language is. And when I work with a designer, I like to work with designers who can also do that. So thinking about language as something that runs from the written word through to image, and that thing I was talking about, how those two things intersect, and it's a continuum, they're completely connected. So collecting a load of weird shit that like I may use for the words contained, or I may find use for it for something that's more visual or typographic. It's all, yeah, it all makes sense to me. So that's kind of I don't know if that's ch I don't think it's changed, but as I've gotten older and continued and become a little bit clearer in like what I do for work or in my life, I guess that's just sort of increased. It's just sort of gotten more. It's become like it's just more, it just progresses more and it's like quite rich.
Mm. And then you collect different things, and then you can almost, I guess, you can almost look at the different things that you're attracted to.
And so yeah, I can probably go through and find a whole like eras of things I was interested in, but uh,
Yeah.
I think it's
Do you,
just
do you put a do you put a date? Do you put your name in the book when you purchase it?
no, no. Maybe I should. Maybe I should like make a nice ex Libris stamp for myself and stick them in. But no, I've never really done that.
I'm
Uh,
putting dates, and I just make sure to put a date and or when the book was purchased. I think
good. That's
not that
good.
that's done anything to me yet,
I
but
can usually remember.
yeah.
Um, yeah, which is cool. I can usually remember. Yeah, I've got like I don't know how I don't know how many books I have, but a lot, and I can usually remember when I got them. Um, yeah.
Um, hmm.
I should add maybe that a lot of that reading and like gathering of printed matter, that's like a thing that's quite consistent. So it's like I have like, I picked up this, which I have in my study because I'm going to put it in a massive folder of like random stuff that I have. But someone put this through my letterbox the other day.
That's
Uh,
brilliant.
it's an advert for a mobile barber, but
Yeah.
I just love it. I love it so much. It really like piqued my interest. the language of it, the misspelling of barber, the specification that it's for old man. It's so good. So this will go in like
And the fact that it's hand done, it's done by
hand done, but then Xeroxed maybe, and then sort of wonkily chalked out. So that's going to go in like a big folder of stuff. And who knows when that will crop up at some point for something. Maybe never, but I see things like that and I need to like I need to keep them. I don't, it's not a hoarding tendency. It's just like it's if it sparks like a particular interest, I think it's good to hold on to them. I think it's kind of valuable in some way. And just to add that, like, as the work that I've done has spread more broadly from like just doing magazines, which I was literally doing for like 5 or 6 years. I just made magazines. That's all I did. Now I make books, like I work in book publishing a lot. So a lot of stuff I'm looking at is maybe more broadly how it might come into play for thinking about book projects. I do a lot more consulting. So we might be making like a one-off thing. Often that might be printed in some way, but even if it's like a digital thing, a lot more teaching, a lot more writing stuff. So all this like weird jumble of material that gets collected is yeah, I find uses for it.
In terms of the, I guess, method
Hmm.
in which you uh, acquire information, uh, I'm interested in your approach to a conversation interview,
Hmm.
whether it changes from, I guess, project to project, as you call it, or whether there is a certain consistency given that you are the same person always.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not opposite. The consistency will be obviously like I am I am the same human being. It's the same brain like talking to somebody, but I'm very flexible to the needs of the project at hand. Um I find that way more enjoyable. So I'm not like, you know, I'm not Hans-Ulrich Obrist. I like him a lot, and I really admire what he does and his like commitment to this sort of amazing continual interview process. But his form is uniform, and it's kind of it doesn't matter what the outlet is really. You'll get a Hans-Ulrich Obrist conversation anywhere it is. I'm way more, and it's partly because like you know, he does it from a position of very much him as an individual, and it's part of his like curating project. And then you can kind of like hold a microphone up to like the inside of his brain and then maybe get that for your book or magazine or whatever you're doing or on stage. I'm way more, yeah, I move a lot between what it is that I'm doing and who I'm doing it for. So in terms of like actually having a conversation and preparing, yeah, it varies. There are some standardized things. Like I will always do tons of research and over prepare and often find myself scripting out entire fictional conversation. I usually before I meet anyone, whether that's for a Q and a interview or to interview someone for a written through profile, where in theory the questions you ask are less there's less weight put on them because you all do a lot of writing around it. I still like have sheaths of notes. I usually make like I usually start off with like, I don't know, like a big sheet of A4 paper and write things out. And then I'll fold up the paper and make new things out of lots of A5 mini booklets. And I will like write out all the questions I could possibly think about asking this person. And it's like almost feels like exhausting or like ex pulling like everything I could possibly have that's floating around my head like out onto the page. And it's just sort of like doing that. And then I write down follow-up questions to responses to questions that I haven't asked that person and maybe never come up. But it's this kind of weird, like, sort of like over preparing. Maybe it's this sort of like getting in a headspace where you just become ready for the natural flow of a conversation and you feel like you can then respond in any given way. And you do have your list of things that you know you need to make sure you ask them before, sometimes you're working in a really tight schedule of time, but it makes me feel less concerned about worrying that I've not asked that person something in particular because in my head I have. in my in my head I've had the conversation, and then I can just lean.
Already had a conversation in your head.
Kind of, and but then I'm listening and I'm responsive, and there's all these cliches about interviewing which are completely true. Like a good interviewer is a good listener, and you're not sitting there just running through your questions and thinking about what you're going to say next. You're really, really listening to that person and responding in real time to what they say. And it's like a dance or it's an unfolding thing, and you just kind of like follow it, and you get try and find the right balance between allowing the flow and then guiding. And it's something I enjoy a lot. But in terms of like the formal process, that's actually quite a consistent thing as this kind of very, very extensive, quite like free associative, just writing out of stuff, filling it up, a lot of notes. I keep them throughout the course of writing and editing the piece. And then I either like chuck them or keep them if I think I might use them for something else. But then the way I talk to the person is 100% influenced by who I'm doing that interview for. I will have an idea in mind already of the voice of the publication, or whether it's a book or if it's live, what's the like mood? How do I need to talk to this person? Is it more serious? Is it lighthearted? Is it going to be quite formal in the structure? Is it really loose? Do I need to be more present or less present? There's a million and one variables that get fed into it, and I'm very happy to be influenced by them and to respond to them rather than just like driving through as my own like singular voice all the time.
So would you say that interview is a kind of crucial medium in
What in general for me, yeah.
for
Yeah.
you? But
Yeah.
yeah. How do you see it more broadly?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think it's fundamental in that it's maybe like removing it from even the idea of the interview as like a published Q&A conversation or something like that. I like reading them still. I still find them fun. Sometimes I'm in the mood to just want to read like dialogue between two people. I don't want to read a profile on it or an essay on that person. And some often I prefer reading it than sitting down and listening to a podcast conversation, whatever. But as like a fundamental like uh act and a thing and like a way of gathering information and like material, yeah, it's super fundamental. Like it's super important, I think. I think it's just like a tool. It's yeah, it's a really important tool. I use it, and again, like I will use my examples just to maybe illustrate why I think it's just important for everything. But like, I will do it for, I don't know, a project I'm doing where it's with like a studio that wants to sort of launch itself and they need some help with like the kind of branding and conceptualizing around how they communicate their design practice. I can't do that unless I've sat down and interviewed them or had a conversation. Interview conversation, I think, they're on a continuum. So yeah, if we expand it to just the act of talking and asking questions and prying and being curious about someone, it's just like I don't know how you would not do it, basically. I can't see it not being a thing. I can imagine like within architecture, it must be really important in certain ways, I imagine. Like you can't just exist in the inside of your own head. You need to sort of sit down and talk and ask questions of people to understand what their needs are. And
Yeah, well, I
yeah.
guess it's interesting in different. I guess that's a really good point because I guess it depends who you're talking to, and it depends whether the person that you're talking to, their main medium is their kind of their what's the word demagogy.
Mm.
That, their words are their medium in a sense.
Mhm.
Whereas when you talk to an architect, their words are not always, I mean, their words are not their medium, and their words are sometimes not necessarily true representations of their medium. Because an architect has, and I was talking to Rainer de Graaf from
Mhm.
OM the other day,
Yep.
and they're very they have a kind of there's a certain cynicism in their practice kind of deeply rooted in the culturally in
Yep.
practice, but then they can't project that onto their clients ever. So I asked him about do you ever tell your client how funny this thing is or how like ridiculous it is? I was like, he's like, of course not. We have a
Mm.
completely different way in which we engage with the client, or actually with media more broadly, because media is clients and other architects and other students all mixed together. So I guess that's interesting that depending on the medium of your interviewee, you may or may not be able to really access that knowledge fully.
Maybe, but I don't know. I think it's just hard for me to say, like, maybe if we like really define what the interview is as a thing, maybe I'll have a clearer like answer on whether I think it's fundamental or not. But I think when I say like a good interviewer is a good listener, I can't
Absolutely.
separate that. So to me, it's like, is an interview important? It's like, yes, because it's just like listening and talking to another human being. So like, that's just like, it's just absolutely fundamental. And then what you do with that and then where it goes and how it lives, that's a whole other question. You could say, is the print interview still relevant? Is the audio interview still relevant? Is the on-stage interview and Q&A relevant? Is the act, I don't know what, there's like a billion ways it could split, I think, but maybe as a cultural form or like a medium, yeah, I think people are still into it. Maybe it's shifting a little bit. Like, yeah, people like podcasts or people seem to, there's a lot of more like public speaking slash like on stage Q&A events now. I think there's an appetite for people to sit down and listen to one or two other people having a conversation with one another.
But do you, I mean, you've interviewed like architects, fashion designers,
Yep.
writers,
Yep.
musicians, presumably,
Yeah,
singers.
musicians, like just like loads of like hundreds and hundreds of people.
Do they vary? Like, are you able to recognize patterns?
Um, yeah, that's hard to say actually. Yeah, I'm actually not sure. Maybe, but
Without being stereotypical, I
yeah,
guess.
without being stereotypical, I think that maybe it's hard. It's hard. I'd say that like sometimes the people who can be hardest to interview, and I say this also as an editor who has to like edit these interviews, often the most difficult people can be actors. And that's because it can be quite hard to get to the core of what it is that you're talking about. Often, if that person's entire world and job is kind of around the depiction of another person in a way, you can talk a lot maybe about the craft of acting, but then if you want to bring it into something else, it can be a bit tricky sometimes. They can be like tricky to like feel like you've like grasped something there. They can sometimes be quite elusive. Um, and that can come through also in written through pieces as well. But that's again quite a broad stereotype. So I think it's quite hard to say. It just depends.
It's still very interesting because I mean, this goes back to that my earlier point about Rainer, who says that they speak differently to different people.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I guess an
Of
actor.
course he does. Of course he does. And again, everybody does.
Yeah,
It's
everybody does. Yeah.
part of the sort of relational nature of human interaction. You always attenuate what's going on inside your brain to the your perception of how it would be received by the other person. Um, it's just kind of like how it works, but also from a tactical thing, yeah, like you talk to clients in a particular way.
It's interesting then thinking how does one talk to the media? Because here in this relational situation, you represent the media, you represent the public.
hmm, yeah, yeah.
So that
Telling the media, it's easy to forget that though, like because like maybe because I work often with a publication that is also quite specific. Like it's not like, the guys who founded it, like they always have this kind of term of like international niche. That's what they see themselves as. And it's like
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
good phrase. And it's just like you can be anywhere in the world and there'll be a small subsection of that population who might be interested in the thing that you're doing. So it's not like mass media necessarily, but they're very engaged in popular culture. But it can be really easy to forget that you're projecting outwards and you're sort of either a representative or speaking to a wider public. Quite often, you kind of just feel like you're just in the best possible way, like talking to yourself.
Mm.
Um, that's what can make something quite strong. That sort of like insularity and internal focus. Um, yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I think yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to go with that thread. Um, other than I yeah, I just think like the act of like talking to another person is super fun and it's
Yeah.
something that I've like it's something that I've always enjoyed
Oh
and
no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's fundamental. I mean, I see it as absolutely fundamental because
mm,
I feel like a kind of a deep engagement in conversation is actually like you are kind of to use you're almost like creating knowledge together. You're actually getting somewhere rather
mm.
than presenting each other with some kind of prepared statements or prepared, highly kind of designed ideas.
Yeah, but that can happen, you know,
Yeah,
that
that
can
can still happen, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I'm generally like not a fan of the overly manicured interview or like the overly prepared interview where you read it and you're like, wow, it's crazy that they think that people will believe that some individuals can sit down and talk with these kind of incredibly well prepared statements.
Statements, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but I like, you know, that kind of thing of creating knowledge together is interesting because I try not to overthink it too much. I think I'm very, sometimes there's a conversation and there's something very like, you know, theoretically or conceptually rich there. And it's like a very clearly more of an intellectual exploration that you're doing with an individual. And that's like a really valid and exciting and important form of conversation and interview. I think that's really good. But I'm also sometimes I'm really interested in a conversation that is its own form of knowledge exploration, but it's more just like the act of sitting down and talking to somebody. And that conversation can be like kind of inane, even. Like it doesn't have to be deep all the time. It can be unserious.
Oh,
It
yeah,
can
absolutely.
be boring. It can be like because often if like the thing that you're trying to do is like a portrayal of an individual who's of interest, sometimes the best way of creating that picture is just through like more like mundane conversation. It's like, what do you get up to in the day? Like, what are you doing? And it's kind of like, you know, you can probe and you can push things further and dig out some interesting ideas, and that can happen. But I like it when sometimes it's really just like an impression. It's like taking an impression of a person. And you can do that through just like random chit chat, and that can be quite nice. Again, it's just balance. Sometimes I want that, sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I love actually having a conversation or Q&A or even editing one where it's really like sometimes I tell a writer or it's my direction to myself, like I want you to go out and talk to them exactly about how it is that they do that thing that they do, but in like very like minute detail and be very granular about it. And I want to know like, but how does it work? And it's like you're getting like, yeah, like hard information, but it could be about I don't know. I remember like commissioning an interview that I really, really enjoyed, which was with this man whose job it is to like look after the oldest light bulb in the world, continue like still working light bulb, and it's somewhere in
In London.
no, it's somewhere on the west coast of the US in a
Okay.
fire station,
Okay.
and they found out at some point that it's the longest continually running light bulb. It was installed in this firehouse. It's never blown a fuse and it's still the same one. And it's the only one of that particular era of early bulb that's still in existence. So they know that that's the oldest one. And it's this man's job to sort of like look after it, but it's still a functioning light bulb and they can't remove it from the thing, otherwise it would ruin its record. So it's there. So it's an interview just about like how he looks after this light bulb. And I loved it. So I'm I like stuff like that as well.
Was it very extensive? Was it like a long interview?
It wasn't too long. It was quite short, but it was just like it's just great to get a window into this particular person's life, and the practicalities of it. And it was a while ago, so I can't remember all the ins and outs, but there was some intriguing things about the measures they take to take care of it, but also like a degree of acceptance that, you know, maybe it will break one day, and that's okay. And
So Elliot, now you're more like kind of doing loads of different projects. I mean,
yeah,
you always have probably, but now particularly you're not tied to
yeah,
a.
it's become more prevalent in the last like 3 or 4 years. Yeah,
Mm. And is that more enjoyable or?
yeah, yeah, way more enjoyable. Yeah, so like, I haven't always done lots of different things. I've always been interested in lots of different things and maybe had like a yearning to do that, but for whatever reason, it's not really been how I've done what I've done. I've also found value in just like concentrating on this very specific thing, which would, I guess, for a long time was making magazines. That's been like of value to me. And then I reached a point where I'd kind of reached the max of what that was going to be. What was really nice about stopping making magazines for like 2 years, and then like, spending more time making books and stuff, and then coming back to making magazines with the same people I was making them with before, was I just realized like all the things, very specific things that I valued about making magazines with this team. It put it a lot more, made it a lot clearer. So I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
enjoy it now. It's a very specific thing that I do, and that gives me because I really missed it. Like when I stopped, I really realized that how particular their working practice is. It's not something that is easy to find in other places. It's very specific. It's been developed over a long period of time, primarily by two guys who have a really long working relationship with each other. And it's a method. They have a method. I love it. You can't just come in and parachute in somewhere externally and then kind of apply that to other working practices. You have to like go with how other people do things. It's fine. But I realized I missed that particular set of methodologies and working practice. So it's a nice thing to have in the balance.
Mm. But I
Yeah.
guess you're also a writer, and being a writer is a very specific frame of mind and space
Mhm.
that you need, and you need silence perhaps, and
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I like writing with noise on, yeah. Or music. Yeah. Can't write with music that has words in it, but I can sometimes write
yeah.
um
What
sometimes it
what
yeah.
kind? What kind of music?
Oh, anything. I suppose depending on where I am with the state of mind with writing it early on, where it's quite fragile and like trying to draw out ideas, I think it has to be things that are a bit calmer and less intrusive, and they maybe provide just a sort of more background noise thing, and like that's kind of anything. That's anything. But I suppose I don't know, a lot of Bach, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, that's what I was wondering, whether
yeah,
it's
no,
like
no,
electronic or whether it's sort of Bach and Chopin and
yeah. I mean, Bach. I listen to a lot because it's also like my my grandfather is a he's it's one of his he's a he's an amazing pianist, and he is obsessed with Bach, and I find his music and the construction of it quite helpful for maybe thought processes and patterns that I get into myself. But other than that, sometimes I'm not fussy. Sometimes I just want to listen to like very easy, fairly ambient something. When I'm editing, I get in strings of being really particular on there's just a certain thing that will emerge. And that's really wide. It doesn't have to be a particular, it could be anything. So like recently, what was I doing? I had a whole stretch where I was listening to a lot of Pet Shop Boys. Um, then there was Dinosaur Jr. was a long time. Sometimes it's like really maybe like I hate God, so sort of like very like heavy stoner like doom metal stuff.
Okay,
Sometimes
okay.
it's got to be just hip hop music. It really depends. Like similarly, how I was describing collecting all these things, like I will really happily listen to anything. Um, yeah, as long as I don't feel it's like distracting me or sometimes I need the to turn off a different part of my brain and go into a more like something that's a bit more propulsive or and music can help with me like help that. So it could be nice. Yeah. But yeah, writing.
That's another interesting thing to track, right? Because music can also track like how it changes the music that you listen to, because you presumably go through circles
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Goes in
and
circles all the time. It's like
then things are added.
things are added. You have to be careful with like what your Spotify algorithm thinks you like, because then it just keeps giving you the same thing over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'm just trying to look at what I had on. I've got like this guy Zach Phillips who's in a band called Freiwillig Glock. That's sort of kind of amazing music. Then yeah, then some some Bark stuff, Ghostface Killer,
Very good.
36 Mafia I was listening to again. There's a kind of good like jazz band called Standing on the Corner. And then this Japanese guy, Hiroshi Yoshimura, who does more sort of like ambient music that's kind of easier to listen to for like when I'm trying to be calm. But yeah, I'm a bit
Cool. This is good. I've never really chatted to anyone about the
I've got
music.
a big appetite for music. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think the writing thing, we've hardly talked about writing, but I think, it's really we've talked more about editing.
Mhm.
Yeah, the writing things are kind of like it's quite a different process and headspace. Like they're
'Cause I
it's
always feel writing is it's such an internal process.
yeah, can be, yeah. Which is why like I mentioned this thing about magazine writing because it's a very collective form of writing. It's quite magic and it's often very overlooked. And it's way more linked to questions of yeah, space and form.
Mm.
Um, and then yeah, writing actual like pieces, essays, profiles, whatever. Yeah, that's very much like kind of like me on my own, I suppose. Um, which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a hard, I guess I wonder whether writers talk about writing. Um, have you spoken to writers about writing? Yourself being a writer?
Yeah, sometimes not too much. I try and like, there are some things I feel like it's such a personal thing that
Yeah.
I read a lot about writing. I read a lot of books I read are, maybe like literary criticism or reflections on, writing practice. And I find them really engaging. And there's a great book I'm reading at the moment, which are a series of lectures by an American poet called Mary Ruefle. And she, from the 90s onwards, has been asked to give like an inauguration lecture to new students of poetry at the university that she lectures at. And she hated it because she was like, I think giving a lecture on poetry is like dumb, and B, I don't like talking, I like writing, so I'm gonna have to write these things down. So there became a kind of like ex way of her exploring this lecture form and writing these ideas down and then trying to find like a core argument. But then also over time, because she's done them for so long, you see her experimenting and like subverting and questioning and messing around with the form of the lecture. But they're really good and it's like a very different type of writing from the one that I engage with necessarily because it's kind of about poetry, but more broadly like the idea of poetics and the way in which your brain will be thinking about things through that form of writing is super applicable. It's just less about I just read that more in the sense of I don't know, like getting a feel for how people think and how they think about ideas and
Ah,
inspire me in some way. The times in which I've read stuff where I've like read a book and it's someone saying, this is how I do this thing, it's not really, I don't know. There's an amazing book by an old New Yorker writer called John McPhee called The Fourth Draft. Um, and it's great. I really enjoyed reading it, but he has a specific thing where when he's writing one of his long New Yorker pieces, he would cut all his text into strips and then lay them out. So he would have them laying out either on the floor or on a big table and use these chunks and rearrange them to get the structure of his piece. Um, I think I tried it like once, but it was just, I don't know, I just it didn't work for me. And I realized a good lesson in not trying to pick up literal methods from people. I don't know. It's taken me a long time to even feel comfortable saying that like I write or I'm a writer. Again,
Mhm.
because I came through like editing and partly because I came through a scientific background where you're really like not taught to think of the thing that you're doing as a form of like writing practice, even though you produce a lot of writing actually, but because it's very like functional in a way. So it's taken me a long time to feel comfortable with that. Even though I would be like writing, I never really worked as like a journalist, I never pitched things. I think I've pitched like one article in my life. I don't really like it as a process. I write things when I get asked to do them. I really enjoy it, but that's often either like I'm profiling someone interesting or I'm going away and writing an essay on like a particular idea and using that as a way of working through that thought process. But it's only like quite, it's kind of almost only since I left the magazine full time that I've felt more comfortable thinking of what I do as like writing. Yeah, I don't know why that is. I think that's just like a form of like self-critique or getting comfortable doing something, and maybe just also engaging with writing in my own practice like more regularly. Um, and as I've done more like academic stuff, writing within that space, within the humanities context, has massively shifted how I relate to my own like abilities and thought processes and kind of like capacity as a writer. It's been very positive for me. Kind of like opened up a massive space where I'm like, oh yeah, wow, like I can do this and like I can translate an idea I have in this way in a sort of like sustained, much longer form of theoretical writing. And that's been really nice. Yeah. And sort of we're like slowly like allowing me to come forward and come out as someone who like writes stuff. It's nice.
But also, I mean, what's so interesting now that we're saying is that you've started writing academically, you've kind of moved away from it, and then you've come back to it in a different form. So in some way, you're now able to kind of look at it and approach it completely differently as well as.
Yeah. Well, also because the space I came back into was yeah, very much a humanities space.
Yeah,
So I mean like what is traditionally seen as a completely separate like
yeah.
you know, kingdom from the sciences. But some of the most valuable thinking and things that I like to engage with operate in the kind of gap. So looking at, I guess, sort of environmental humanities and ways of looking at ecology, the natural world in a way that like operates from a more literary or like discursive essay-based way of thinking about the world, but is also not dismissive of things like field work or data gathering or empiricism, which are often dismissed. So my time, I went and like part of my time out of like being doing fashion magazines was going and studying architectural history at the Bartlett, and
Oh
that
yes.
enabled me to yeah, like engage with some things that I'd left behind back from like being a zoologist, like going out, looking at another living thing that's not a human being, and just spending time looking at it and producing some form of knowledge from that engagement. And yeah, it kind of I had this thing where I got very frustrated for a long time about why all the people who wrote books that I liked about the natural world all had backgrounds as professors of literature, basically. And I was like, I don't fucking understand it. It's so weird. Like, why do you get to write about this stuff in this particular way? Why do you get to write like an interesting, kind of theoretically rich, but also accessible novel or account of your experience doing whatever it is, but looking at the natural world? Like, why do you get to do that? Why is it so common that you have to have studied classics or literature theory or like whatever their particular background might be? I couldn't figure it out, and it really annoyed me for a long
Mm.
time. And I was like, all the books that are written by scientists about this are shit, and they're like popular science books. I'm not really interested in them. They're kind of maybe sort of interesting, but most of them are bad, or not bad, but like they weren't the thing I was looking for, as maybe like a precocious scientist who read a lot of literature and was very interested in that. So I couldn't wrap my head around it. I don't think there's necessarily an answer, but what I realized was that engaging with this stuff from a space and form of thinking that you might gain from like, yeah, the literary world or humanities space opens up other ways of engaging and thinking and writing about these things. But from my time looking at it myself, I've also really come to appreciate, yeah, that way of looking and thinking that comes from a more empirical, scientific way of studying and looking at the world around you. It's been really good. So like the fundamental thing being another thing that I got pissed off about was like I'd maybe like meet, I'd go to like, like some of my work, like I would get like nominated for some kind of like prize for like student work and stuff. And I'd go to these things and I'd meet someone who was their field was like animal studies. So I was like, oh well, animal studies, cool. I study zoology, like we're quite similar, I think. And they're like, no, we're actually very different. Like my stuff is like the critical study of animals within culture. You study like things under a microscope. And it was very dismissive and like very much like this is this thing, this is this thing. Um, that was quite disheartening, and I get it, but it also really, it's like only more recently that I've dug a lot more deeply into that fundamental difference between looking at another living thing or an animal, say, or a non-human being as a cultural object and a thing to be studied, almost devoid of life. You're looking at it as like a cultural phenomenon that you're going to study, and then looking at that thing as a living subject, an actual thing that has life and is alive and doing things, and you're going to study it as a thing like you would with a human being perhaps, or just another living entity, and a sort of looking at the subjecthood of other living things and writing about it from a kind of humanity standpoint has been great. So I love that stuff, and that's a lot more of the like writing I'm doing in my own time.
But it's amazing because I feel like they say stepping out of it, going into a magazine, like writing about architects and fashion and art, and then allowed you actually to do that. Because had you not done that, you wouldn't be doing that now.
It's maybe allowed me to have a slightly looser way of thinking about how you write, um, and definitely given me a much clearer idea and sense of like how I want to write. And there's a saying of like voice is within writing is something that's earned. You get it through time and just actually writing. You don't just sit down and say like, this is my voice, I'm going to write in this way. I think if you did that, it would be really bad. You sort of earn this thing gradually over time and through reflection. But I realized, being in an academic space again and having to produce writing, that without realizing it had developed a particular voice and way of talking, and a lot of my notes would come back that like my writing was maybe too loose. So it's like it helped me to sort of follow certain ideas in a deeper way and not float across the surface all the time, and to follow certain things really far down, like all the way down, bam. But to hold on to the value of being able to be looser, be playful, be accessible, write things in a way that people will want, not just like understand, but also like want to read, and it might be appealing, and to think of the idea of like the audience and who you're writing for. Um, that's been really, yeah, I think my way of writing within more kind of academic spaces has totally been influenced by magazine stuff in ways that I didn't realize it had been, but it's just come, you just find that stuff is happening naturally, and you sort of look back and you're like, oh wow, that's cool. I didn't realize that it'd be.
I mean, that's what academic writing needs. I mean, academic writing needs that to
Hmm.
be able to kind of read.
Yeah, maybe. I also but I value
Of
like work
course.
produced like there's a value of work that's also like produced for the academy, and
Yeah, like your interest in archaeological society annual reports. I mean, it's a very specific kind of
yeah,
writing, probably
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, again, it's that question you said, that thing you said right at the beginning of like, not everything can go in, like
Mm.
you can never have everything. You have to choose what lens you're applying to that thing. And yeah, sometimes that lens is like purely for a very, very academic context, and that's cool. But I do find it's just also a personal thing. It's like the stuff I engage with the most is stuff that I feel like